Welcome to episode 5 of the Speed Secrets podcast with today's guest, Peter Krause. We'll talk high performance and race driving and give you some tips and advice that you can use to improve your own driving.
Welcome to the Speed Secrets podcast. Join Ross Bentley and guests, drivers, instructors and coaches, engineers, officials, and others for conversations about high performance and race driving. Listen for tips and advice, thought-provoking ideas, and inspiration to take your own driving to the next level. Green, green, green!
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. You're going to like today's conversation. I've got Peter Krause here today as my guest, and thanks for joining us, Peter. This is going to be fun.
Well, thanks, Ross. It's always a lot of fun when you and I get together.
You know, when I look around the country and I look at the number of people out there who are, that call themselves driver coaches, and I look at the ones who I describe as mostly coaching because they're underemployed race drivers, or, they're anxious to drive other people's cars, or, they're a race driver trying to make some income on the side. And then I look at the ones who I think are, that I would call true professionals, who are really committed, dedicated to being a coach as a career, as a profession. Well, that group is pretty small, I think, and, in your experience. And by the way, I think, you are a true professional coach and one of the best, in my opinion. And, so how many of them are out there? How many of us are out there?
Well, thank you, Ross. I take that as high compliment just principally because I think you, of all people, are probably the person that moved the professional driver into the realm of the professional coach. And not only did you do that, but you developed a methodology and you developed a way to transmit and transfer information to the people that you were working with very successfully. And so it made my job much easier, certainly. But the thing that really made our job a lot easier was when Tiger Woods was interviewed in 2008, I think it was, and said, I use a coach. And all of a sudden, the landscape shifted, because I certainly remember when I decided to move into the idea of professional coaching, a lot of my friends who had known me for 20 years before that said, "You're going to charge for what you've been giving away for free for 20 years?" And I said, they say, "Tell us how that works." Yeah. And, it's obvious that it's worked out very, very well. And I don't think that there are very many people that do it on the level that you and I do it. I think that there are some wonderful people who have been doing it for a very long time. I think of people like Bruce McGinnis, a big mentor for me. Mike Zemicki, another great colleague and somebody with tremendous experience at the highest level of open wheel road racing in this country. I think of Jim Pace, multi-time IMSA winner, won Daytona 24 hours and the Sebring 12 hours in the same year. I think of those guys who are really there for their clients. They're not there for themselves at all. As a matter of fact, they minimize their presence and instead focus all their efforts and all their resources towards helping the people that they're working with go quicker.
A couple of points come out of what you just said is, Jim has won a lot of races, and I raced wheel to wheel with him a lot of times, and a great racer. But not to take anything away from Bruce and Mike, but they didn't win a ton of championships or big races, but they're incredible coaches. So the whole fact that just because you're a good driver doesn't mean that you're a good coach. I mean, that's obvious. I think everybody kind of understands that, but I think it sometimes gets lost a little bit. And you also you talked about you're going to get paid rather than do what you did for years for free. And I think being a professional doesn't just mean you get paid to do it. I think a lot of it has to do with, really if you're a professional at something, you are trying to be the best at it or at least keep refining your skills. And there's professional development. And I think, I think that's one of the things that makes a difference between what I'd call the pro coaches that are out there is, they're constantly working at being better coaches. They're studying other areas and, you know, I can remember, I can remember reading about Tiger Woods' coach and kind of his approach to coaching Tiger Woods. And, so I'm kind of looking at that and going, that's part of being a professional as well.
Well, it gets back to a discussion point that you and I have had many times. And that is that the professional coach certainly has a different set of priorities than most of the people out there. The priorities, again, focus on the development of the individual, the development of the individual driver, the formation of a cohesive organization and presentation that allows people to do more than they thought they themselves were capable of doing. And I think that's the real difference.
Yeah, and I think it leads that. I mean, if you asked a coach, which would you rather do, drive a car or coach? And I think if you could get an honest answer out of that person, I think that tells an awful lot. I mean, there are a lot of coaches that if you ask that question, they'd say, "Well, given a choice, I'd rather drive the car." Personally, for me, I'd rather coach now. I'm at a point where I would rather coach. Do I still love getting into a car and driving? Absolutely. But given a choice, I would rather coach somebody. And I think that's part of it as well. So it's, it comes down to what's a person's motivation for being a coach?
Well, let's talk about history here, okay? History is that there have been professional road racing schools in the United States and in Canada for many, many years, all over the world, as a matter of fact. The Jim Russell School of Motor Racing, Skip Barber Racing School, Bertil Roos, any one of a number of really high level, the Spinard David School. I mean, I think about how instructors at those schools got to where they wanted to be, and that was to latch on to a student who wanted more than what was provided at the school. And they were willing to pay for it. And they would say, okay, I want you to work with me. And that instructor would say, well, if you want to work with me, I need to jump in your car. Or what they would say even more so would be, I need you to build a team, buy a car for me to run it. You can run a car. Oh, by the way, you can run a car. And, that still goes on. But that was the only way up for a lot of instructors before, and that's not true now. Everybody's a coach, everybody's a life coach. Everybody's, we can talk about all kinds of different things. But that's it.
Yeah, and to be fair here, I mean, I think both of us would be the first to say, hey, we're not the latest or the greatest in the world. I mean, there are some really, really, really fantastic coaches out there who do it as a part-time thing. And, I think you and I had a conversation a little while back about a fellow that we know who, he's a fantastic coach, but he doesn't do it as a full-time thing. And, and so I don't want to put it in a way that, hey, we're better than everybody else, because we're not. We're different. And actually, I kind of look at it and kind of go, boy, man, are we ever different? I mean, yeah.
Well, that's true. I mean, our priorities, though, are also ourselves. We study everyone and everything, and we are more open. I think both you and I have become more open to new ideas because of the depth and breadth of the people that we've worked with. And we study, and I'm just saying this as an effective methodology. I'm trying to look at what makes a successful coach. Because I think there's plenty of people out there who would like to be successful coaches. And I'm not averse to sharing my methodology in doing that. And you haven't either. How many books have you written? I mean, we talk about this all the time in terms of developing ourselves and learning new technology and applying that technology and getting the word out. That's what's wonderful about the podcasts, about Speed Secrets Weekly. I mean, I think of all of these new vehicles and these new avenues for information to emanate because people are hungry for it. There's more people now than have ever been before doing this sport. There are a lot of people that have no interest in competition driving.
Yeah.
They want to take their high performance street car out and test themselves instead of testing themselves against someone else, although that invariably creeps into it. The issue is that it's never been easier to get on the racetrack, but people don't have a lot of time. So I think one of the great benefits of a professional coach who's functioning at a very high level, like you, or like Jim, or like a bunch of other people that I know. When I say a bunch, I mean a couple of dozen, probably nationwide, is that they save time. They really, really shorten the learning curve and allow these people to progress in a much shorter period of time, much further than they would do, A, on their own, or B, with someone who had not already worked out a methodology on how to evaluate, analyze, and formulate a very targeted plan for their client to move forward.
I also think it's interesting, you look at the coaches that are out there and kind of we all have our own little specialties. I mean, Peter, you're super, super strong in the data and video area and analysis and that whole, in using that as a tool. But I also know that's not your only tool. I've seen you look in the eyes of a driver and read the driver's face, which is a big part of it too. So let's change gears here, no pun intended. And, one of the other areas that you and I have spent an awful lot of time talking about is the process, to best learn a track in the most productive, the most efficient, the quickest. I mean, as you talk about, one of the things that a coach can do is help you learn and prepare and get results quicker. If you have a process for learning a new track, you're just going to speed that whole thing up. And, obviously we did that webinar last year for VIR, how to learn VIR and track walk kind of a thing. And, we're recording some virtual track walks and we're going to have more and more of those out here soon. So pay attention. But even those, they're just part of an overall plan to learn a track, ultimately how to master a track as quickly as possible. And so I guess let's spend some time, Peter. Let's spend a little time talking about the process that a driver should go to if they're going to go to a new track. And that's what I want. I want somebody to leave here today almost with a list and go, oh, I need to do this, 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 and this. And that will help me learn a track more quickly. So do you want to start?
Well, sure. One of the stalwart things that people do before professional sports car racing weekends is the track walk. Invariably, what happens is there's an hour or an hour and a half of time that are dedicated to people walking, biking, taking a Taylor Dunn around the track, and just getting the lay of the land. Long before the technology, before simulators became common, before data became common, before video became common, people walked tracks. And one of the very early memories that I have from mentors that I've had a long, long time ago are track walks, and these track walks where a mile and a half at Lime Rock would take us an hour and a half, and we would look at cracks in the pavement. We would look at where paint markers changed. We would look at the alignment of telephone poles with one another. We look at billboards. We'd look at brakes in the Armco, in the guardrail on either side of the track. And we would do our best to memorize as many permanent landmarks as we possibly could so that we would know what happens before we got there. And in the car, you have no time to process that information. You don't really have time. Nobody I know is disciplined enough to go easy enough on an outlap to take in what they need to take in. I don't know how many times I've suggested to drivers, hey, slow down. Go out on your outlap of your first practice or your first test session and go easy. If you see or feel your vision narrowing at all, you're going too fast. Slow it down. You've got to go slow enough to be able to keep your eyes moving. You've suggested, Ross Bentley, have suggested at every opportunity how important vision is. And I think that vision is where you start with learning a new track.
So when you're talking about these landmarks, we're talking about reference points, right? And you talked about the visual part of it, but reference points are not just visual, right? There are some of them that you feel, there are some of them that you hear, right?
Absolutely. And honestly, I never heard of the word kinesthetic before I started reading your book. I mean,
I invented it, actually. No.
well, the cool thing is, I knew it when I felt it.
Right.
So like, the turn in for turn one at Roebling Road is a slight depression on the very outside edge of the circuit, just as the outside edge of the pavement begins to turn. So, yes, I think that you take in through all senses those landmarks.
Yeah, I think, there's a number of tracks. It's interesting. There's a number of tracks where, for example, you're coming down the front straight and the sound of your car is bouncing, echoing off the pit wall. And it's like, and then it kind of goes quiet. And you in your mind, you're going 1, 2, 3, brake now for the first turn. And so there's auditory stuff. And there's certain places on the track where you kind of go, the track surface changes and the tires make a different sound. And you go, oh, if it doesn't make that sound, that means I'm not in the right place. Right. So I think, I guess my point is that, these reference points, we spend an awful lot of time focusing on the visual reference points, but the kinesthetic ones, the ones that you feel and the ones that you hear, are just as important. I mean, if you've ever driven a car in the rain on a racetrack, you know that your visual field or your vision is restricted. You need to trust that what you feel and what you hear more so in those situations. So all of those things are incredibly important.
Well, another thing that has resonated with me in some of the information that you have published is the idea of driving a car to its limits rather than your limits. We sit here and we can get hung up and OCD about these landmarks. We can be so intent on making it down to the inside curbing that we forget to go back to power.
Yeah.
And I see this all the time. So sometimes people have to step back and say, you know what, I'm just going to drive it until it begins to slide, and then I will have a better idea of what to do or what geometry to make.
Yeah, I always say drive the car, not the track. And I think you're right. We can get to the point where, and I don't want to generalize too much here, but probably more so with less experienced drivers is, they'll go to a track and they get so overly focused, so OCD on the line. And, a lot of times you ask somebody, why do you drive the line that you drive? Well, because somebody told me to drive that line. Well, right. The answer should be, because that's what my car told me to drive.
That's right.
And so sometimes if you just go out there and you drive the car at its limits or close to it, enough that the car is giving you that feedback, telling you what's going on, at that point, the car tells you where you should be on the track.
Absolutely.
You don't have to say, you don't need somebody standing on the side of the track. You don't need somebody sitting in the car next to you. You don't need something else. You don't even need to compare yourself to the video that you've watched before getting there in some ways, because the car says, no, you need to turn in a foot later, or you need to, hug the, kind of stay with the apex curb a little longer here, or release the car a little sooner, or something like that. So I think that's a really, some of the drivers that I've worked with, just having them really focus on driving the car at or near its limits makes the biggest difference.
Well, to summarize, the idea that the geometry is determined by the car-driver's combination,
right,
instead of just the driver, is the step that people need to go quicker, for sure.
And I've certainly noticed that if you get overly hung up on that line, you tend to drive less than the limits. When you drive the limits, you tend to drive closer to the line. And in fact, actually, if you drove offline, but you had the car on its limits, right at the ragged edge, on its limits, you would be faster than if you drove online, but you drove under the limits. Now, I'm not saying the opposite side of the track or anything like that, but the point is that if you're trying to go quick, focus on driving the car at or near its limits.
Well, one of the things that I look to for some inspiration sometimes is, I'm active on a variety of different forums and answering questions and batting about ideas. But there was a very interesting post not long ago where a fellow said, I have a question. Here's two scenarios. I can be inconsistent in my car position going into a corner, and still make it down to the apex, and then come off the corner really, really well, and it feels really good. Then I can go in to a corner using all the width of the road, but I can be wide of the apex and I feel slower. And I said, well, you know what? You are thinking the right way. You are absolutely thinking the right way, because when you get down to that inside curbing, for whatever length of time, and obviously longer is better sooner, and then you can back off of it. And there is a way, and you and I need to talk about this. There is a way to progress. I mean, too often people go the wrong way, and they end up falling off the circuit and doing damage to their cars and other things like that. But I thought this fellow was thinking. The post showed to me that somebody said, you know what, I'm really trying to question this. I'm really trying to think about this. But the first thing that I learned after the track walk was utilize, unless there is a compelling reason not to, always fully utilize the width of the track.
Why not?
So if there was one sort of pearl that was infecting my head when I went out in my race car, it was in a new track, it would be utilize the full width of the track. You and I worked together at COTA, and you watched my first on-track session in my own car. Now, I'd studied video and data for years before not for years, but a year or two before I went there. But you came back to me and you said, hey, you look pretty good. And I felt that was really good. That was validation for this idea of utilizing fully the width of the road, making sure you touch the inside curb at every opportunity. That's the second pearl. At every apex, you make every apex. You can modify after, but you have to hit the inside curb unless there is, again, a compelling reason not to. I think that's the biggest question a lot of people ask me as a professional. They say, look, I've listened to hundreds of instructors in my DE, and they all have a different line. And I said, well, there's your answer.
Right.
There is your answer. It is not what somebody says. It's what the car will sustain, will affect, what will suffer, what it will suffer,
And I think, so let's kind of, I guess, step back a little bit and go, I'm sitting here saying, go out there and drive the car at the limit. Well, hey, that's great if you're an experienced track day guy or an accomplished racer or something like that. But, for somebody that's relatively new to the sport to say, go drive the car at the ragged edge and you'll find the line, maybe not the best advice. So, stepping right back at the very beginning, I mean, I always tell people, and I think this is an area that a lot of people forget now because they can go onto YouTube and watch videos of cars going around tracks so much, they forget the most basic thing. Print out a track map. Sit there and look at a track map until you know that if I walked up here and just said, turn 6, oh, it's a right-hander. And you should be able to go. And I think it's important actually to know the names or the numbers for the corners, so that if I come up to you and say, tell me about turn 6, and you go, oh, you mean the right-hander that's a increasing radius corner? I go, yeah, that's the one I'm talking about. That's important. So I think, right from the very beginning, start with a track map. Then you can start, watching those videos on YouTube. Although, as you know, not everything on the internet is accurate.
Fancy that.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, after walking the track and sort of learning the lay of the land, the next business is to learn the order and severity of the corners. And I think that is one of the great things about using a simulator, even using a game console.
Right.
You don't need to be good at the sim. You don't need to be good with your fingers. You need to know which corners you need to slow down for.
Right.
And you and I have said this 1,000 times to people. It's not where you go fast. Any Yahoo can have their foot all the way down. It's where you go slow that makes the difference.
Right. The other thing that I think that it might be becoming a bit of a lost art, or kind of a lost art in a way, is, there used to be, I can remember way back when Sports Car Magazine would always publish these on a regular basis, a lap of Mid-Ohio, a lap of Sears Point, a lap of so-and-so. And it was, they found a driver who was, the expert at that track, who wrote an article that was like, hey, when you're approaching turn one, this is typically a third gear corner, whatever. Well, tons of those articles are out there on the internet. And again, you got to be a little picky and choosy about what you pick up off the internet. But I think reading those things are really valuable, because it's one more thing to help, get you programmed into what's coming up next.
That's right. Those hot laps, and they were the original hot laps.
Yeah.
That's they were called.
Yeah.
And they showed up in SCCA Sports Car Magazine, a bunch of different places. But when you have a multi-time national champion and a pro champion like Don Knowles give you a hot lap for Watkins Glen, you could probably take that to the bank.
Right.
Or at least give you a pretty good idea of, you know what, I'm going to have to go down a gear here. And you get that salient information, because I think the biggest impediment for people going quicker is trying to push this conscious deliberation to the subconscious. You've got to commit to memory this information in advance, so that you don't enter Big Bend at Lime Rock saying, "Oh man, I forgot to downshift." Well, there's your lap.
Right.
So first things first. The most basic things have to be addressed first.
And another thing that I've done with a lot of drivers that I coach is, when we get to the track, and it's a track that the driver's never been to before, whether it's immediately or after a session on track, I like to go to various spectator areas and take a look at corners from different angles. I mean, I remember last year, I think it was, or the year before, going with a new driver to Watkins Glen. And, getting up on the hill and looking down on the toe, and, kind of looking at or the heel of the boot and all that kind of stuff. When you're up on the hill and you're kind of looking at it going, you get a different perspective, and you watch some other cars go through there. And it just, it helps cement, like you said, the programming into the subconscious. And again, kind of just gives you that different perspective. I think it's a valuable perspective.
Oh, it is. And I mean, the more perspectives, the more data points
right.
that can be imprinted, the less conscious effort the driver needs to devote to conducting the car around the racetrack.
Right. And, and then obviously, hey, where I come from in my world, it's, sort of around the whole mental game stuff is you need to do some mental imagery after every session. If you sit down, there's this great quote, oh man, I'm trying to think of where I can get easy access to people for it. I've got it in my mental imagery ebook, but it's from Kenny Roberts, the great motorcycle racer, American motorcycle racer, GP motorcycle racer, the first American world champion motorcycle racer. And, him talking about going to some track in England, I think, and being like 3 seconds off the pace. And he's like, wow, wow. He was never been that far.
Yeah, sure would.
Yeah. And he says, I went into the trailer and I crawled up on top of a pile of tires, laid up there, closed my eyes, and visualized riding the track. And he says, I came back out, and the next session was out there, and I was half a second off the pace. So he says, right. I went back up there and got on top of the tires again, closed my eyes, visualized riding the track again, and he was half a second quicker in the next session, half a second quicker than everybody, which shows his talent. But going from one session to the next and learning that quickly, a big part of it was he did a lot of it when he wasn't even on the track.
Absolutely. One of the greatest, another great example is if you search YouTube for Simona de Silvestro's blindfolded lap of Barber, where she not only gets the scale of the map down correctly, but also the general radius of every individual corner. And blindfolded, the pen ends up nearly in the same place that it started.
Yeah.
So the power of the mental imagery cannot be underestimated. It cannot. And the more you can can work on that, the better you get.
So, Peter, just go through the priorities. A new driver, relatively inexperienced, they show up at a track for the first time. What should they work on? Should they work on, all the corners at one time? Should they work on late braking first? Should they work on corner X? What's your kind of just the most basic priorities you would say?
Well, the priorities are a little different for the people that I work with. A lot of the people that I work with are older folks who are men and women who are quite successful, have a relatively valuable car, have, different priorities than going out and blowing everybody away. They want to learn and they want to commit to memory good information. So the first order of business would be to begin. I think you have to begin before you get there. You have to obtain some sort of vetted list of videos. When I say vetted, I mean validated by somebody you know and trust who does this reasonably frequently, to say this is a good reference for you to move through and to preview before you go. The next order of business would be, if possible, either walk it. If you can't walk it, do drive-arounds. Many organizations now begin the day by low-speed drive-arounds. I've been to a number of club races lately that allow that. The third thing is to absolutely assemble track maps with corner numbers that are identical for everyone under the tent.
Right.
So, for instance, if you are working with someone at the track, you better make sure that your turn 6 is their turn 6. Most tracks this is not a problem with, but some tracks, there are several different, at Barber, there's 4 different corner numbering schemes, 2 of which are relatively common. So you have to be careful about that. But then the next thing is to go out on your first session, and the goal would be to determine the order and severity of the corners. Try to figure out where you need to slow down and begin to work out the gear selection if it's not already done for you by the car. Increasingly, more and more, the cars are beginning to determine for you. I think of PDK transmissions, for instance, which are wonderful things because they take a large challenge out of the way of many drivers seeking to get better. But also, if you don't have that, begin to work out the gears. If you are going through particular corners in a window of speed, use the same gear for each of those corners. The next thing, when you start adding speed, before that, after the first session, come back in, go through the map. Write down 3 things that you would like, that you think you did well, that you think you understand well, and write down the 3 things that you are most fuzzy on or have the most questions or are the greatest challenge to you.
And Peter, just to jump in there, I think the other thing with that track map is that's when you start writing down, making little diagrams or just notes of some of those reference points, those landmarks that we've talked about. It's like, if I come over turn 3B at Sonoma, line up with the pole and the, those kinds of things, or, the thing you mentioned about Roblin Road, turn in when the car hits a little compression and turn 1. So write those things down on that track map as well. When you write things down, they stick in your mind.
Well, they really do. And when you're driving around gently, slowly, in that first session, keep your eyes up and moving. It's really, really important. So many people focus on developing landmarks on one 2-dimensional level. They look at only the curbing and the edges of the road. They don't look at eye level or above eye level. Say there's a car in front of you. You need to make absolutely possible. Sebring is a perfect example. Flat, featureless racetrack. 2 turns, turn 10, turn 13, tower turn. They're very similar in their approach. They look similar, but they're different speeds. And to make that capability, you need to line up the observation tower on the right side of the hangar with the 3 palm trees in front of it, so that if there is somebody in front of you, you know where you are. You don't lose track of your own position. The first order of business is learn the position around the track, come back, debrief yourself. The second thing would be, as you are beginning to increase your speed on the track, focus on corner exit. Focus on corner exit the first. That has to be the primary focus for the next time out. And the reason for that is because it's safe, dependable, reliable. You can often pick up information about the topography of the racetrack as you become more aggressive with the throttle. But make absolutely positively sure that you are always starting from the apex and pushing that throttle off the corner to allow the car to push wide at the exit. I mean, that is what your goal is, to utilize fully the exit of the width of the road at the exit first, after you've made the inside curbing. Then come back in, do your debrief. The third session, start working on only one axis. When the wheel is straight, you should be fully committed to throttle or nearly fully committed to brake. Notice I said when the wheel is straight. I'm not talking about compound corners. I'm not talking about anything other than the basic places. Turn 1 going into Watkins Glen. Turn 2 going into Laguna. So the issue here is making sure that you extract fully the capability of the car in the fore aft axis first. This is after you move off the exit of the corner. The last thing to work on is working out the junction or the area or the distance covered between the end of braking and the apex. That's the last thing you work on.
Wow. I hope people listening to this were making notes. I've been sort of kind of making a few kind of jotting down some notes as we went through here. I think, if you kind of take stuff that we've talked about here, and I kind of, because I like making these podcasts about the length of an average commute. So we're getting close to getting to work or getting home here, Peter. So, I think things we've touched on are track map, choosing the right video to watch online. Simulator is great. Reading, a lap of type of article, getting to the track, looking at the track from a spectator's perspective, doing a track walk where you're focused on picking up landmark or reference points. When you come back in, making notes, maybe that's a time to review your own in-car video if you've got it. Doing mental imagery or visualization. I think the way you talked about approaching the track, it was corner exit speed, and then maybe more. Then once you've kind of got that, then you start to work more on the corner entry with braking, and then you start to think about your cornering speed. And we touched on this overall theme of drive the car, not the track. And I think the last piece of that whole thing is then once you've done that, that's when you start really getting into the reviewing your video and data. And Peter, sorry, but that's a conversation for another day. You and I are going to come back here and we're going to have a conversation about video and data, because that's a whole other podcast for that one. So.
Well, thanks a lot, Ross. I mean, it's so much fun to talk about this. Obviously, you and I are very passionate and very excited about this.
Oh yeah.
That passion is not enough to sustain a business, but somehow we've been able to do it.
Yeah, well, I think so. Before we wrap up here, what are some of the things that you're doing that you're kind of excited that you want to share with people right now? I mean, do you have a particular project that you're working on this year that you want people to know about? And what are some ways that people can connect with you, your website or social media or whatever, something you want to share with people?
Well, certainly, I'm focusing more on not only selling, distributing, supporting, and teaching people how to use the latest in GPS data acquisition and video, high definition video technology. I'm a big believer in helping people coach themselves. And I think this equipment has never been easier to use. I think the technology continues to be easier to use, and there's no shortage of that. I'm trying to focus on doing more work closer to home. I think a lot of people say, well, I can't work with Peter because he's all booked up. and that is true most of the time. But I would like to do some more work at VIR, and I have a nice 1,200 square foot facility there that is outfitted with a plasma on the wall, simulators, that sort of thing, and offers a great place to debrief drivers at that track. A wide variety of competition venues and DE venues. I don't make, there's no division for me between a driver doing high performance driver education and somebody doing IMSA lights. Yep. Or GT racing. To me, the challenge is within the driver and helping the driver formulate a plan that they can execute. That's really what I get continually excited about. And of course, any collaboration with you, Ross, is is a lot of fun. I look forward to that this year.
I guess the good and the bad is we've publicly committed that we're going to do some things together this year. So I guess we got to get our butts in gear and make those things happen. So, which we're working on. So, and we'll talk more about that in a future podcast as well. So your website where people can go and find you is
my website is www.peterkrause, PeterKrause.net, and there's lots of good information there. I'm building another one, which is www.gofasternow.com.
Very cool. I didn't know about that one.
Gofasternow.com will focus on short videos to teach people not only what to do with their data, but how data systems work and how to maintain them, install them. A lot of people gloss over that, and you need to have an understanding of how this stuff works together, and that will gofasternow.com will focus on the use of that technology.
And is that site up and live right now?
It is.
Okay, great. So I'll put in the show notes, I'll put the links to those sites there, and that's where how listeners can get more information about you, Peter. So again, thanks, Peter. We'll be talking some more and seeing you at the track. And as always, keep having fun.
Well, thanks a lot, Russ.
Here we go again with a quick speed secret. A short reminder that will stick in your mind and be useful the next time you're on track. Here's today's tip. The more quality sensory information you put into your brain, the better the quality of the output will be, the better you'll drive. Your brain works a little like a computer. If you put poor quality information into a computer, you'll get a poor output. It's the old GIGO or garbage in, garbage out thing. And the opposite is also true. Put quality information in and you'll get quality out. When you work at looking farther ahead, you're actually improving the quality of the visual information going into your brain. So if you practice taking in better quality visual, auditory, and kinesthetic or feel information, you'll drive faster, more consistently. And that's not a bad thing. If you'd like more tips, advice, and resources, check out my website at speedsecrets.com. And if you'd liked what you heard today, please subscribe to the Speed Secrets podcast. And even better, leave a review on iTunes. I'd really appreciate it. Hey, keep learning and having fun.